Evening all, welcome to the press preview, our first look at the front pages as they arrive. Time to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. With you guys in just a second. First, let's run through the front pages, beginning with the Eye, its headline. Starmer fights to limit damage after second candidate rants about Israel. We'll be talking about that in a second. Same story for The Guardian, calling the Labour Party infighting turmoil. Here's the Financial Times. It reports that NATO is poised to announce that most of its member states are on track, I should say, to meet the target of spending 2% of GDP on defence. Concern, of course, has been mounting over whether the alliance might be forced into conflict with Russia. Here's the Metro. It says there's been criticism of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for relaunching their website as the King undergoes cancer treatment. Here's the Mirror. It has coverage of the PC Sharon Beshinevsky murder court case. The Daily Star dedicating its front page to the BBC radio host Steve Wright, who died at the age of 69. Same story for The Sun. Their headline, Radio Wonder. Meanwhile, The Express questions what on earth is Britain coming to over pro-Palestinian protests outside the home of the Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. Just a reminder, but by scanning the QR code you'll be seeing on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages whilst we discuss them. We are joined tonight by Jenny Kleeman and Ali Miraj. Lovely to see you both, and lots to talk about. So let's get started, and we'll begin on the front page of The Guardian. Who wants to take us away on this one? Labour in turmoil. I mean, who'd have thought it?
Well, yes. I mean, another day, another candidate with another set of comments that are creating another headache from Keir Starmer. He would have hoped that this would have all gone away. But apparently, in the same meeting as our Ali made those comments, which have meant that he is no longer going to be a Labour candidate in the Rochdale by-election, another prospective candidate, Graham Jones, made some comments that have resulted in him being suspended from the Labour Party. And this is such a problem for Keir Starmer.
Before we get there, though, what exactly has he said?
Well,
we need to be a little bit careful with the language that we use, but what has been said? Well,
he has said something which I think you would have to work quite hard to call it anti-Semitic, but he has said, and I'm going to sanitise my language here.
Please do, please
He said during a meeting, and this is the same meeting, and it was in October, I'm sure when world leaders go home, like me, pardon my French, they say effing Israel again. And he also said that British people who want to fight for the IDF should be imprisoned. These are certainly anti-Israel comments, whether or not they're anti-Semitic. And here is the thing. So Keir Starmer today, when he was interviewed, repeated the word decisive over and over again. I've been decisive in all of this. I have decided that the time is right to no longer allow Azhar Ali to stand as a candidate for Labour. And he seems to have been incredibly decisive in this decision to suspend Graham Jones, who was going to be the candidate for Hyndburn. You could definitely make the case that what Graham Jones has said is not as abhorrent as what Ali said.
Ali, where are you in this? I mean, let's start actually with the three words the first three words of that headline there. Labour in turmoil. I mean, are they?
Well, it's certainly not good.
Not good. But are they in turmoil? Let's talk about the language use here.
Well, I think it's highly problematic for Starmer because, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he wanted to put clear blue water between, no pun intended, clear red water, whatever you want to call it, between himself and Jeremy Corbyn. He wanted to detoxify the Labour brand. He was very assiduous in doing that after that Equality and Human Rights Commission report that came out in 2020, which banged the Labour Party to rights. It had breached the Equality Act on 2 counts. There were a number of complaints made. There was also allegations of interference with how these complaints were handled. Starmer has really tried to take the Labour Party in a direction where it can rebuild relations with its Jewish voters. Now, in the middle of all this, you get this... It's a very fraught, very emotional time for a lot of people, and you've got Azhar Ali coming out to a bunch of Lancashire Labour activists saying that, and let's not forget what he said, that effectively, words to the effect of, Israel had orchestrated the killing of its own citizens, 1,200 of them, to then do what it wants in Gaza? I mean, really? Now, the interesting thing is, not necessarily that Azhar Ali's gone, which he absolutely should have. It's actually the fact that no one pulled him up in the meeting for these comments. And can I just say this? This is not news to me at all. I mean, the amount of times I have been to polite dinner parties in North London and been told that 9/11 was a Mossad plot, I cannot tell you.
But there is a difference between, you know, going to, and I'm picking a random part of North London here for a dinner party, you want to go to Islington for it. There's a difference between being around the bien-pensant and being a candidate for the party in the next general election. Does the vetting process, do they not now have to start over with pretty much everyone?
Yes.
I mean, go back to the drawing board.
Well, I mean, this is a real problem for Starmer because, first of all, anti-Semitism was a disaster for Labour, and also because, and as we know from the Conservative Party conference where Rishi Sunak was emblazoning the stage with the word change, focus groups have shown that what voters want is change, and this is something that Starmer always had on his side, that he could say, I have changed the Labour Party, I have rooted all of this out. And, you know, I'm trying to find polite ways of car crash, there's a word, car crash, of how they've handled this. In Rochdale, there are going to be now 3 candidates on the ballot paper that are former Labour Party candidates. You have one in George Galloway, who is a Labour MP over 20 years ago. You have one in Simon Dantock, who was an MP 6 or 7 years ago. And then you have one who's going to have the Labour logo next to him, who, if you vote for him, he's not actually going to be representing the Labour Party.
But before let's move on to, we can see the front of the eye. Sorry, Ali, carry on.
I was going to say, well, the thing is, what do we expect Starmer to do? He was slow in dismissing this guy and withdrawing support. He's done it now. He's been very quick with this Graham Jones guy. What else do we expect him to do? There are currents within the Labour Party that come out with this kind of nonsense. Now, they should not be standing for public office. Completely unforgivable, but they reflect a deeper issue in parts of the Labour Party and the populace at large, where conspiracy theories like this have some currency. Now, that should be worrying us all on a much deeper level.
What he should have done is acted really decisively on Sunday when all of this came out.
Yes, that's true.
No place for this.
That is true.
But the thing is, he was already on the ballot paper. You can understand what they're thinking, like, this is going to cause a huge problem.
The Galloway issue too.
Galloway issue is enormous.
Because Galloway's going to benefit from this. And remember that in 2005 in my constituency, Bethnal Green and Bow, he did get elected on the back of the Iraq War.
Yeah, he does. We should say George Galloway also saying he'll only be there for 200 days, you know, until the election.
Exactly.
But let's just, because of course we have been talking about the by-election in Rochdale, we should at this point bring up the voter list. Of course, this is after, of course, the point at which Labour withdrew its support for Azhar Ali. But let's move on to our next story, and this one is on the front of the Financial Times, and it's the timing of this that kind of gets me slightly, and it's slap bang in the middle there. Most NATO members are going to be hitting that target, the 2% of GDP that everyone who's a part of NATO is supposed to pay so that it shows their commitment. And it just so happens that we've got a US presidential election later this year that could put NATO's biggest enemy into the White House.
Yes, and that man...
And I said that advisedly, NATO's biggest enemy.
That man, Donald Trump, 2 nights ago, made a very, very incendiary and some would say ill-judged speech where he basically invited Vladimir Putin to attack any NATO country that did not pay 2% of GDP, which is, of course, deplorable. There's a word that shouldn't really be used in connection with Trump. But, you know, this idea that it's a transaction, the allyship of the US, and you pay up or you're harmed, is, I think, quite worrying. However, this rhetoric worked. It seems it is spurred NATO into, it's going to announce, according to the Financial Times, that 2/3 of its allies will hit 2% of GDP this year.
Just on this, Ali, I mean, everyone always talks about it being Donald Trump that was the one that raised this with NATO. I mean, Obama was doing it. We've had US presidents since time immemorial.
He was.
He was the one that managed to get it onto the front pages and has managed to get people to increase their contributions as NATO member states, hasn't he?
Because he's been very stark about it. And look, there is no forgiving Donald Trump for coming out with things like, well, Russia should go and invade whoever it wants. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But where he was bang on was, you can't keep basking under the umbrella of American security without paying up. And it's absolutely right. When you hear Emmanuel Macron, the French president, talking about strategic autonomy time and again, you go, well, hang on a second, where's the beef? Where's the money? So actually, Jenny's absolutely right. Back in 2016, there were only 5 out of the 31 NATO members, well, I think there were fewer then, but the 5 of the relevant members at the time that had actually paid 2%. Now it's 18 out of 31, and it's meant to be 2/3 by 2024. So what he said had an effect, and now they're going to be adopting a charm offensive, 3-pronged. 1, pay the money. 2, they're going to actually be trying to be much more polite to him. And 3, also focus on China, which he's absolutely concerned about, which, again, he did warn about early.
I do want to move us on to the front of the Daily Express, because I think this is a story that is worth covering. Whoever wants to take us away here, but this is, of course, Tobias Ellwood, senior figure within the Conservative Party, former military man himself. His family has been besieged by people accusing him of being a war criminal. Someone's going to have to explain this to me.
Why is it Ellwood anyway? I mean, they could go after half the Tory party. They could go after the Prime Minister at Downing Street. I'm not sure what Tobias Ellwood's done particularly here. I mean, we know that Mike Freer, the MP for Finchley and Golders Green, is standing down on the back of similar, let's say, verbal attacks or whatever. It's become very, very fraught. Look, people are passionate. Emotions are running high, but in such an environment, people need to act with decorum. You can make your point powerfully and clearly, but you can't be besieging someone's house. He's in the house with his kids, for heaven's sake.
Well, where does acceptable protest begin and unacceptable? Sorry, where does acceptable end and unacceptable begin? Because I think of, we've seen former senior politicians having their wedding days disrupted. Yeah. We've seen the Prime Minister's constituency home, people sitting up on the roof of it, and plenty of people are saying, well, we can protest where we like. I mean, if that is acceptable, why is this unacceptable?
Well, Section 5 of the Public Order Act says you shouldn't harass people. Yeah. And there is a point where protest becomes harassment. It's designed to intimidate people. And we know that MPs have been murdered in the past. And so turning up at people's homes and frightening their children doesn't sound necessarily like protest. I mean, we need to know more about exactly what was going on here, but there is a difference between trying to harass people into not doing their jobs or not speaking out and legitimately making a case. And you could argue that you would get a much bigger audience for what these protesters are calling for if you were not outside an MP's home.
Jenny's right. Look, MPs have died over this, right? So you remember Stephen Timms getting attacked. We had David Amess also being killed, Joe Cox. We take the security of our MPs in a far too lax manner. I know they want to be accessible to the public, but there are limits.
Guys, we are going to pause there. After the break, we're going to be discussing whether or not it is fair to criticise Harry and Meghan for relaunching their website whilst Harry's dad undergoes cancer treatment. We'll be discussing that next. Welcome back to the press preview. Jenny and Ali still here. And we're going to go to the front of the Metro for our next story. And this is an interesting one. I mean, the headline's quite good, I have to say. A click in the teeth for Charles. Jenny, on you go.
So Harry and Meghan have rebranded themselves, supposedly. They have a new website, sussex.com.
Right.
Which replaces archwell.com. I think they had a production company called Archwell associated with their podcast, didn't do very well. And they had to set up Archwell because the Queen, his grandmother, wouldn't let them use sussexroyal.com. They're not supposed to use their titles, so they just used sussex.com. And people are angry about this.
What, the people of Sussex are annoyed about it, or more generally?
People who don't like Harry and Meghan are angry about it. I'm not a massive fan of Harry and Meghan. I have to say, the suggestion that this is... this has been insensitively timed to coincide or otherwise with the King's diagnosis is, these things take a long time to plan. I'm sure this is just a coincidence. I'm not sure it would help things otherwise if they had delayed it. I think some newspapers are determined to get very angry about Harry and Meghan. There are legitimate things to get angry about with Harry and Meghan. in my view, their website and its name isn't...
Well, I'm a bit perturbed by this because, look, if I'm typing in the directions to Glorious Goodwood, now I'm going to be directed to their website.
The people of Sussex have a right to be
exactly.
angry.
The people of Sussex have a right to be angry. Look, I think this is... Firstly, I must congratulate them for changing their name from Archwell, which sounded like a US private equity firm.
Yes.
So at least
absolutely
that...
or management
not that I have anything
consultancy.
I have nothing against US private equity firms, but I'm just saying, this is better branding. But, I mean, on their website, they're saying... Show up, do good. It's like, is this an exercise in complete narcissism on the part of these two people? At the time when his sister-in-law's just come out of hospital, his father's like trying to put a brave face on and deal with his cancer diagnosis. There's a time and a place. Now's not it, is it?
All they have is their brand and their name. That's all they've got left. I'm happy to just give them this little URL because I feel so sorry for them now. That's all they've flogged every single horse that they have.
But I'm sorry to labour this point, but if, you know, they're not supposed to be using their titles, they're not supposed to be using their titles. I mean, the argument that seems to be coming back from their spokesman, the spokespeople, is, well, it's their name.
But
well,
also, why do they want to use their titles if it is so poisonous to be part of the royal family?
Well, it's the only way they can monetize.
Well, exactly.
I do find it all rather unedifying, to be honest with you.
Well,
I mean, look, they're adults, they can do what they want and they can go and pursue the life they want. But I think there's a time and a place. I just think it's bad taste.
Let's then talk about a man who's featured in all the papers tomorrow, but I have to admit I quite like the Daily Star's treatment of it. The BBC legend, Steve Wright, who's died at the age of 69. I mean, no matter if you've worked in our industry or not, you knew who Steve Wright was, and even if you weren't a fan of his, you had to admire the man's professionalism. He was always capable of producing good radio, which is a lot more difficult than it appears, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, the tributes today, not just from the BBC bosses who it seems, axed his show. He didn't seem to want to leave his afternoon show. But it's not just them who were gushing. Everybody was gushing today. He was a very loved person, by all accounts, a very nice person. And this is also really shocking. He signed off his show on Sunday, which was a pre-recorded show, but saying, see you next week. So he was only 69. He sounded quite a lot younger than 69. It's a real shock, I think.
I mean, such a distinctive voice, Ali.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, 40 years, top of his game. And Jenny talks about the tributes coming in. They have been for far and wide, particularly from broadcasters themselves, who regard him as one of the greats. So, you know, what can you say? The Bieber are upset about it, obviously, but all his fans are upset about it. And most importantly, the people who looked up to him as a true professional, as a broadcaster, really admire him, and rightly so.
I'm hoping that there is apparently another show that is in the can, as we say, which I cannot imagine that the BBC will release, but I am absolutely certain there will be an awful lot of material from the archives being put up over the next 24 hours, and rightly so. Guys, we will pause there.